Hi, my name is Easton. This is my co-host Chris, and this is episode 4 of the RockFace Studios Game Design Podcast. How are you doing, Chris?
No, I'm getting by.
Just getting
Lots
by?
of energy today.
Yeah, I know.
Have
I
been.
think we were both before we clicked on record, we were both talking a little bit about our energy levels. The best way to start a podcast and make it engaging is talk about how low energy we are, huh? That's probably gonna rope people in.
Yeah.
But no, I think one thing I have noticed is that talking about game design, it's fuels me, it gives me energy. It doesn't take away as much. So that's the good part of this, right? Is even if I'm starting low energy, there's no better way to gain energy than to start talking about game design. So that's the lie I'm telling myself at least.
I don't know this
Uh,
optimistic person I'm listening to here, but yes, I agree.
um, I'll just let that comment go. I'm a very optimistic person, as you know well. Uh, okay. As we've been doing recently, we're going to start out with some kind of personal headlines. I'll make Chris go first this time. What's your personal headline for this our fourth episode?
Yeah, so this has been sort of a slow transition, but been over the last 4 years playing a lot of competitive TCGs. And I feel like it's always fun to have something competitive to really get into. And sometime during that, I found tennis, which was slowly just replacing TCGs and card games in general. And so I think I'm kind of in a little refocus period where I'm going to do more board gaming and maybe more board game design for that competitive TCG space and let tennis take over the competition part. And so I'm already signing up for a few tournaments this year. And it's been a while since I've competed in a physical competition because, TCGs are mostly mental, even though there's a physical component. But it's interesting to have to manage more than just your mental and a heavy reliance on the physical for tennis. It's just a different headspace than being in the TCG world has been for the last 4 years. So I'm really enjoying that and got leveled up this year in rankings. And so I'm getting my butt kicked a little bit, but it's good for me. I'm learning a lot and having a lot of fun learning. So
Yeah, I think we're fairly unified in this kind of change in our life. Competing in TCGs is not only how I met you, but also it's been such a huge focal point. It's been the reason we've done a lot of traveling, or it's been the focal point of those traveling experiences,
mhm.
and it has absorbed a lot of time. It's crazy how much time it takes because with TCGs, you always have new sets coming out, new shakeups to the meta game, and so you got to stay pretty tapped in. Otherwise, you're going to fall behind very quickly. And I've
Yeah.
felt that in the last couple of years as I've kind of taken a step back and still kind of like going in and out and trying to prepare as best I can, almost last minute it feels like. And there are people who don't do that. There are people who grind these things day in and day out, and that was me at some point in my life, and it's just not that anymore. So it's just always good to
Yeah.
listen to yourself and be willing to yeah, make those big changes, even though it's been such a big part of my life for so long. If it's not filling me up, then move on to something else.
Yeah. It's good to be varied too in your things that you put your time into. And so I think it's really just a lifestyle when you're doing TCGs. And so it's hard to have two of those things at once and you kind of got to choose. So
Yeah.
it was a good long run of competitive TCGs though. And all the travel was awesome. But, it's a natural time to move on a little bit, I feel like. So
Yeah,
I'm excited.
definitely. Well, pretty similar personal headline for me. I Uh, I've done a lot of traveling in the past few years, even in the first quarter of this year. And yeah, I'm starting to look a little bit more at just having more experiences local. I moved to Colorado about 6 years ago at this point, and I have had way more experiences traveling abroad than I have here. So, gonna take a little step back there. That's kind of connected to the whole TCG player thing. I still have a couple more tournaments I have planned, but taking a step back, doing more here. Chris and I are both going to a concert after recording this. I went to a show a week ago, have another tomorrow, so that should be a really good time. And yeah, I think it's just a good opportunity to invest a little bit more effort into our company, into game design. Like you were saying, they fill up a similar space. And because I think you and I both appreciate kind of diversity in how in our day to day and our week to week, with as much we were preparing for TCG tournaments, and then combining that with all of our efforts in board gaming, it made very little time for other things, and so something had to give there. So,
Yeah.
yeah, just a recommitment to kind of focusing on this. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to see around Colorado. Sometimes I also forget how awesome this area we live in
Yeah.
is. And so it's a good area to explore for sure.
Very nice. Okay, well, that's our personal headlines. We're going to go into our next segment, which is something we started doing, I think, last time, which is just like one thing we've learned about game design recently. I'll go ahead and start us off this time. I think this one was one that pretty heavily impacted me in the way I was designing games, because I would come up with a new idea for a game, and then I would just sort of like think on it and ruminate on it and consider it a lot. And eventually I'd reach this kind of like bursting over point where I had to start to like put it into application and start the design process. And that's very easy for me once I have that idea and I have those thoughts to back it up. It just overflows and I kind of can't stop myself from continuing to design and iterate. And the iterate part is kind of what I'm talking about, the big takeaway, which is I think for me, I have overtuned games before the first playthrough. So, whatever the minimum viable product is, I kind of get past that and I move on to more and more kind of like um, uh, focusing on more and more details of the design and trying to identify problems in the system. Even though I haven't tested it yet, I'm pretty good at identifying it, but I'm ultimately doing myself a bit of a disservice by trying to iterate too much. So I think for me, a big takeaway has been really try to focus on, even if I do have this big inspiration and I have all these ideas that I want to get into application, I try to create some boundaries around that and only get as far into the design process as I need to ultimately be able to sit down with Chris or someone else and be able to do a playthrough. And ultimately, the inputs from that experience and playing that is going to be it's going to output better results for when I actually do go back into it and try to tune a little bit more. So I think for me, it was something that I think it's pretty obvious when you spell it out that way and you think of it like that. But I think it's easier said than done, especially when you're somebody like me who, when you start the design process, you don't know when to stop. And so, trying to keep that top of mind, trying to make sure that you are keeping the big picture in your mind and trying not to go too far down that path before you've actually gotten some more inputs. And at the very minimum, seeing some other people, how they interact with it, see their thoughts. You get too stuck in your own brain, and I think it ultimately hurts you. Because I think what happens is if you do go too far down that path, then you might grow very attached to these mechanics or these attributes of the game that ultimately you see as a sacred cow, but they shouldn't be, and they end up holding you back. And you also just convolute the whole early design process by having too much going on, such that it's hard to identify what are the core foundational aspects of this that are working, what's not, what can we improve on. Once you have a sense of the bare bones, what is working, you can try to push those things. And likewise, at the bare bones of the design, what is not working, pull that back before you've gone too far down that path. So that's been my big takeaway. I'm going to try to keep that very top of mind for future designs.
Yeah, I feel like if nothing else, it would gain efficiency. And, both of us doing this as a second job slash hobby, it's important to stay efficient at these processes. And also, I think one thing from designing and playing our own games, just seeing it on the table teaches you so much. The earlier you can get it to the table, probably the more you learn and the more tools you have to iterate. So I think that makes a lot of sense. The hard
Yeah,
part is getting it to the table in that time span. So we'll have to figure
yeah,
out a good system for that. And, if we have a four-player game, it'd be interesting how quickly our friends start running away from us when we have new
yeah,
games every 2 weeks.
yeah, exactly.
It's like, hey,
Uh,
Bill, do you want to test this game? Huh? What?
um, cool. What would you say is one thing you've learned recently, as you've interacted with game design and kind of honed that skill more?
Yeah, so I've been sort of in a, I guess, inspiration rut, I would say, as far as coming up with new game ideas. We've had a few sessions where we'll do collaborative design, but none of those ideas really stuck with me. And I've been, I guess, more on the industry side of board gaming and the business side, and put a lot of energy into that, and haven't put quite as much energy into actual game design. So the other day it was kind of refreshing to take a new angle on it. Easton and I are trying to figure out what our first game might be for the company, and we've had ideas for a while that it might be Amnesis, and we're under the current environment, we're kind of weighing our options, and so we backed into game design a whole different way, kind of starting with requirements to design a game that would be reasonable to print under this kind of economy we're living in with tariffs and all the challenges with overseas shipping and things like that. And so that was our starting place. And we came up with some requirements that our company could, I guess, see ourselves being able to produce this game successfully, because with the other two games that were sort of in different production timelines with Amnesis and Fibonacci's Harmony, there's all kinds of challenges that we're learning as we go along. And so we're taking that learning and putting it into the design of this game itself. And I think we came up with a pretty cool idea that I'm excited about iterating on and just designing within. So that was a fun process. And usually, the alternative is coming up with like some kind of flavor concept, or like world building more so, rather than like nuts and bolts of what your requirements are. And so even if you start with flavor, I think it's good to check in where your requirements are. So you have, when you're designing, you have clear goals for what you want out of that game.
Yeah, I also think one thing worth mentioning is that you and I both brought a game we had already started working on to the table when we started
Mhm.
this company almost 2 years ago. And we've really kind of been doubling down on those. Um, and I, I think we might have gotten to the point where we pigeonholed ourselves a little bit because ultimately we have learned so much over the last couple of years. And similar to what I was saying with my takeaway about getting too far into the design process before you get the kind of inputs you need to be able to output a better product, we got pretty far down that path prior to a lot of the lessons that we've learned since we started. And so I think it's a good experience at the very least, even if we do end up going forward with one of those original products as the first or second or never, doesn't matter. Regardless, this process that we're doing right now is really helpful because we're taking everything we've learned and we're starting from scratch and we're doing it together, which is also pretty fun.
Yeah,
Considering how
in
long we've been
hindsight,
doing this, we haven't done that much actual code designing, so that's also
yeah.
fun.
I would say that when you're forming a board game company, like coming up with a game that meets your company's goals as its requirement is a good place to start. And we also got into the conversation about kind of defining what your portfolio of games might be, or what realms are okay to be in that portfolio. And that's just something that we just kind of dove in head first when we started. And now we're backing up into kind of defining what our company might look like, and being intentional about that. So in hindsight, it's a good place to start, but if you don't know, you don't know. So,
That's why you're listening to this podcast to get our
and now you know.
our feedback. Let us tell you about the mistakes we made so that you don't have to make them. Okay, cool. Well, those are some good takeaways. I like that segment. I think it's good to just like really hammer home what we've been learning, make sure that we're both on the same page about it, and then also, yeah, impart that wisdom to others because we are, new to this world, but we've also been in the gaming space for a long time. So if it is something that was new to us, or at least like putting a focus on it was valuable to us, then I think a lot of our listeners might also find that value. So always looking to share that. Moving on to our main topic. So this is going to be, I don't know if it's going to be more of a discussion or a debate. I think Chris and I don't know exactly where we, like how much we disagree or if we do here. So only time will tell. But we do have a conversation point, and the basic gist of it is this idea of should you only design games that you enjoy playing? We were just talking about this idea of creating a brand, a portfolio, an identity, and a type of game ultimately that your company produces. We are looking at that recently of looking at gaming companies that we really respect and want to kind of emulate and seeing that, okay, they kind of stay in their lane to a degree, whether that's a type of genre of game, whether that's a level of complexity, whether that is a type of flavor. A lot of companies will pick a lane and stay in it. And I think it makes sense because obviously you're growing a community, and anybody who might be interested in following RockFace Studios also has a bunch of other gaming companies that might also be interested in following. So, what's going to make us unique? What's going to make people want to really follow our journey and play our games? And the answer is that our games appeal to them, and our games can't appeal to everybody, and they shouldn't. Games are so unique. We have so many of them already. So why make a game if you can't really find a new way to express, um, you know, um, game pieces, math, the experience of playing a games with friends in a new way and appeal to a certain type of person. So anyway, that's where we're kind of looking is finding that lane and sticking in it. And something that came up as we were talking about this is this idea of Chris and I both have our own preferences. We have our games. I would say we're actually pretty opinionated. I think we're pretty open-minded and can enjoy a lot of different games, but I think we have strong opinions of what games we like the most, what games we like less, and what games we don't want to touch at all. So an example for me would be a game that has so low agency that ultimately I don't have meaningful control over the outcome. For me, that ruins it because I am competitive, but mostly with myself. Like I like the process of trying to understand the rules and trying to challenge myself to find great lines, find great play patterns, find avenues to ultimately come out on top. And if I lose, then I can look back at my decisions and think about what I could do better. And if I win, I feel rewarded for those decisions that I made. Um, and that's what I get out of a game. So a game with very low agency, losing, winning doesn't matter. I'm not going to feel satisfied because I didn't have real say in the matter. I don't know, Chris, do you want to speak to the type of game you don't like, just to kind of set the tone here?
Yeah, I think social deduction I think social gaming experiences, specifically, maybe deduction is not the right word, but I think the mechanism where there's like a judge that votes on sort of arbitrary things to determine a winner, or if there's segments where there's just not a lot of structure. I don't like those kind of wild card games. So like when games have like open trading phases is another thing. So I like structure and I like living within that structure that a game provides. And when that just kind of breaks down into chaos, I sort of lose, I guess, my attention span very quickly on being able to engage with that. So,
Cool. Yeah, and so like I think the example there that you've given in the past is like Cards Against Humanity, not really your thing, right? And it's interesting to bring that up as an example because that's one of the most popular games that people play,
mhm.
in our day and age, um, especially at like parties and bigger groups. People love that game. Not your thing. And so this thing can be successful, and it can also not be our flavor of game. Um, and ultimately, I think the conversation kind of comes down to should you steer clear of even trying to design a game that doesn't fit into a category you really enjoy? Are you better off just focusing on your interests and trying to create a community of interested people in our company that relate to really ourselves in a way? Are we trying to ultimately attract people that have the same opinions as us? Do we want to appeal to them in a different way? Do we want to choose a different avenue to follow, maybe more of a universe building thing where it's less about our identity as a company as about the type of game we have, but more about the universe that we have it within? There's a lot of questions around this, and I think the crux of the conversation and where we've maybe had a little bit of like, I don't really know, and so let's make this a podcast topic is
Mhm.
um, yeah, should you just steer clear? Like, would it ever be beneficial for us to really make a Cards Against Humanity like game? Because I do agree with you, like, it's not my type of game. I can enjoy that in a setting if I need to. It's not my type of game. I don't have as strong of opinions, but also not my thing. So would it ever make sense for us to design a game like that? Or, like, even if we felt like we had the audience to do that for? Or ultimately we not doing ourselves and our audience the best service possible by just leaning into our strengths?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the topic in general. There's a lot to kind of get into as a uh, yeah. I guess do you want to kind of take over from here and maybe share a little bit of where your current position is there, and then I can do the same, and then we can kind of talk about it, and then at the end we can come back to it and decide if we've shifted it at all.
Yeah, that's a good intro. You brought up a lot of good questions, and I'm going to try to leave any prefacing out for the discussion. So I'm going to try to just make a statement that is my current position, which is funny because I've been sort of arguing with myself over this topic for the last couple weeks, knowing, well, we didn't know till recently this was going to be a podcast topic, but this is sort of a problem I've been arguing with myself for since I've been a designer in any capacity. And so I think my statement now, it's the question is, should you only design games you enjoy playing? And I think my statement is, if you want to design games that are great rather than good, you should stick to things that you're passionate about. And so I'm currently more on the side of yes, you should stick to your passions on this.
Okay. Yeah, I think for my position, it's hard to not try to like infuse a little bit of like nuance into it, but I'll try to frame this as like, succinctly as I can. Um, I think that it all comes back to what your goals are and um and yeah, identify your goals, and if inherent in those goals is this idea of, because I agree with you, like making the best possible product, the most inspired product, then probably just focus on what you're doing. But if your goals are different than that, then be flexible for that. So that wasn't very succinct, but I'm trying here. Um, uh, um, the I think I'll springboard off that and I'll talk a little bit about it because I've already over-explained my position. Um, so why not go further? The the uh, I think here's an example of like why you might do this is um, if you are trying to think from a business perspective and you want to tap into something that you think will be popular, well received, be played by a wide range of people, might be just a successful product. And if everything's kind of directing you towards a type of game that you don't necessarily feel passionate about, other than just your own opinions on it, then I think you should probably pursue that because ultimately what you're trying to do is have a successful product. So if all we cared about here was the business side of it and like let's be a successful game design company, and that's it. It's not really about our journeys as designers. It's not about the joy of just playing in the space together, which I think it is. A big part of what we're doing, you and I, is a lot about the journey and just enjoying this process and see what comes of it. And I think we care about like this is something I'm passionate about. This is something only I could make because of my interest and my skills and etc. So this might not be us, but you might have the goal of like, I just want to be successful. And that is totally understandable, respectable. And if that's the case, I don't think you should really hold yourself back from designing the game that you think is going to be the most popular. I think I've gone more in this direction recently, where I've been watching some videos of just people playing kind of more on like the casual party game kind of side of things. We have our game night, and some people there are more interested in some of like the lighthearted games as well. So I'm just kind of I'm experiencing a little bit more of that, and so I'm trying to kind of warm up to it. I think it's a little effortful, but I think it could be fruitful in the end. So I don't know if you want to respond to any of that.
Yeah, I think that, defining your goals as a company is a big part of this. And one place that I argue with myself is sort of like taking myself out of our current position where we are a company of two that is not really on the line to make income now. We're sort of just trying to make our best game for us and release that game. I think that there's different answers depending on the context. And so if we were part of a larger company and we were working on a small part of a larger game, even outside of board games, you could think about like a video game for this. I think that you could have satisfaction just doing your job on that game well, and maybe as not the director, just somebody that's helping out on a part. I could see more that the end product isn't something you're passionate about, but you're still passionate about the piece, doing the piece you have well. Um, but I do think when I extrapolate that, this company that's making this larger game, the person that's the producer or in charge of the project should probably still be passionate about that game that they're outputting. So I think at some point in the process, you do have to be passionate about your product. Um, and so maybe our context allows us some wiggle room to decide, do we care more about putting a game out into the world that we want to see, that we would enjoy playing, or do we want to, see our company be more financially successful and put ourselves in a place where we instantly have a larger audience just because of the type of game we put out, right? Because if you put out a lighter kind of, 45-minute game that plays 2 to 6 players, those kind of games just have so much better appeal at a game night that it doesn't really match up with like something you're trying to put out a 2 player like living card game like Amnesis. That's going to have a much harder time getting to the table in those scenarios. And so while we love those kind of games, we're sort of at odds with which one is going to identify with our audience the best, and do we have time to deviate past identifying with our audience, and still be successful. So I think we're sort of a little bit torn between, we want this project to make money so we can put that back in the company and keep making games, but we also, me, feel very strongly that I want to put passion behind it at the same time. So sometimes it's hard to merge those two things. I think I struggle, when you're not driving exactly towards your passion or something that you're like, ooh, I really want to see this game be made, this game in the world. It's kind of hard as sort of hobbyists slash, very new company defining what we are, to take that route that would be more financially successful. So that's sort of the struggle right now for me.
So I want to poke a little bit at this idea of something you're passionate about, because I think you can get your passion from different avenues, different directions. And I think that right now you're definitely the way you're talking about it, you're thinking of it in terms of like, I'm passionate about this style of game, so therefore I'm going to design a game of this style. But I mean, the passion could also be like, I am passionate about like making a game that a community of people really enjoy. And
Mhm.
that journey in and of itself could, I think, be enough. So I want to ask you, like, um, two things, two thoughts with this is like you and I have had quite a bit of experience now demoing our games and seeing um, how people interact with them, seeing their reactions, hearing their feedback afterwards, even dissecting the feedback to try to like get the golden nuggets that you really need out of it. We've had a lot of experience with that at this point. Do you think that if do you think that if you design a game that doesn't really fit into your wheelhouse and you demo it to people, a group of people who like enjoy that style of game, whether you're playing along with them or not, maybe you're just an observer, do you think you could like watch that, um, get something out of that experience and get motivation out of like seeing how they interact with it and being able to ultimately take that feedback? And do you think you would actually do a good job at that, or do you think it's the same kind of incompatibility thing where it's like I don't like this thing, so I can't relate enough to these people and their experiences to actually be
Mhm.
able to take this feedback and put it into application?
Yeah, I think so you kind of teed up part of my research, which is funny because we didn't really talk about this. But one thing I've realized by doing a little bit of digging online and just kind of thinking about this for the last couple of weeks is that when we're designing a game, we're probably so far in the weeds of the good, the bad, the flaws that it's going to be hard for us to enjoy that as a player. And also, by the time it's released, we've probably had this product through different iterations for a year or two. I don't know how long, right? And so I think it's a little bit unreasonable of me to think that I would love playing the game when we release it. I think that's like such a high bar that I'm trying to reframe it in a way that you're sort of getting at with your statement. But what I really think of it as, we're playing a game of designing a game. And if that game is satisfying, which that would include, seeing people experience your game and have the experience that you were hoping for, I think that could be satisfying in itself. And so this is where my main argument against like designing a game to your passion, or that you enjoy playing, sort of hits a wall, because I think it's so unlikely to be true at the end of a project after you've put so much time and just lived in that game, that it's going to be really hard to just enjoy playing it as just a player rather than the designer.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and it kind of runs into this thing of like, uh, I mean, no matter what style of game it is, you should be designing it for your audience, not for yourself. Um, and so there's almost this question of um, like just to play devil's advocate, is there any argument in the other direction where it's like, could you ever get too close to a thing where, let's say, for example, you and I, we have the most experience with like TCGs. Let's say you and I decided we wanted to make a TCG. Um, is that really a better path than trying to find some sort of middle ground between our interests and what our audience might like? Do you get too biased when you get too attached to something, or like if it's like the genre that's like your favorite or similar to like your favorite game, like how often do biases come into play, and can you avoid some of those biases and maybe even be more objective if you don't have as much of an emotional connection to the game?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that, all things being ideal, you'd probably work in the area where you have the most experience, which it's hard to say for me at this point if it's TCGs or just sort of other board games in general. Those are sort of board games is its own category. They all feel similar. TCGs is just another beast, which I think I've spent roughly even time in. But I feel like if you're designing a game where you're sort of out of your depth, where you're not, I guess, as expert speaking the language of that style of game, you're not going to have as many tools to pull from. And so I do think that it's helpful to be knowledgeable in the area you're designing for. Although a little bit of naivety sometimes allows for creativity that you wouldn't otherwise have. And so I think I lean a little bit heavier into go with your strengths, but don't do that at the expense of ignoring things that maybe are not your preference.
Yeah. One thing that I think about when I think about this topic is just how endless, how boundless this whole space we're working in is. Like basically, there's an argument of like down the road, maybe after you've produced a few that are your type of a game, can you should you challenge yourself as a designer to like try to force yourself to do the thing that you're not a natural at, that you don't even necessarily enjoy? Is there value in that? And I think it's like pretty easy to make like a good faith argument that it's like, yeah, it is good value. Like just better understand the space. There's more to learn there because you've explored less of it. You can ultimately take that back to the other designs that do fit into your wheelhouse and maybe like take some nuggets of wisdom and apply them there. There's good arguments you can make there. But on the flip side, um, I could design only deck builders my whole life and never reach the bottom of that hole. It's boundless, it's endless, it's pitless. Like it's there's literally no end to anything, and so I don't think there's really any problem with you being more of a specialist in terms of a designer. And I would say that just my naive opinion would be that if you try to be a jack of all trades, you are going to be a master of none. And ultimately, there's so many people competing in this space. There's so many talented designers out there that um, I think, yeah, I think you're probably doing yourself more of a service to try to be an expert of one or a few things rather than a master of everything. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Um,
think the companies we've reviewed too, like you were stating at the beginning, the really successful companies that we tend to, I guess, hold the highest regard for seem to specialize and then branch out from that specialization. But I'd say like 80% of their content, you can kind of see this common thread, and then they branch out a little bit from there. Um, but kind of changing just thought process just a little bit to your point about designing outside of your wheelhouse, I think that a lot of designs um, are great designs because they solve a real problem. And so when you identify a problem, which is generally something you don't enjoy, you decide how to fix it, and that becomes a design. This can be outside of gaming. This whatever. This could be a mechanism to do your taxes faster. I don't know. But when you find a problem you don't like, maybe you're just passionate about that problem. So when I think of like the Cards Against Humanity example, what if getting to the bottom of why I don't like that game can innovate in that area? I think maybe that's an interesting way to think about going outside of your preferences. Maybe you're not passionate about how they exist now, but we are passionate about board games and solving design problems. So, what if you can make that style of game something that if you win over a person that doesn't like the thing in the first place, you've innovated in a meaningful way within a genre. So I think that might be a fun design challenge, if nothing else.
yeah.
Um, so it's just maybe there is maybe some value in going away from your preference to solve, like ask yourself, why don't I actually like this thing? Can I fix that?
Yeah, it's interesting because there is also the counter argument of like, well, if you're if you're not even in that space, if you're not even that guy, you're not the social party game designer guy. Who are you to really be able to successfully iterate on that, right? It's like it would almost make more sense for the person who has been making this games for a long time to have the sort of inspiration and knowledge to back it up to be able like, okay, now I can really iterate on this. So I think that sounds like more of a successful just exercise than it is like I'm going to take this product and make it a thing just based off of that. But I do think it's interesting, and I think there's a whole other topic that we've kind of touched on a little bit throughout this conversation already, which is different, separate, might be its own podcast topic at some point, something we've talked about in the past. And it was this idea of like um, designing from scratch or designing from a template and the values of one versus the other. I know, speaking for myself, I've gone through my own kind of arc and journey from when I started doing game design, and I actually was pretty under um, I didn't have enough knowledge in terms of like enough board games. Like I actually hadn't played that many different board games, and I've played a lot in the past couple years, um, just because of this guy. And I and I've learned so much, and so I've kind of changed my tune on that a little bit. Where like early on, I just wanted to go max inspiration, max put my identity and my passion and whatever into it, and try not to be informed too much by industry standards. And I've almost got done a 180. I mean, I still see a lot of value in that, and I think if you're making a product that is functionally a reskinned version of another successful game, established game, what are you doing? You know, what's the point? There's a whole gaming industry, especially when it comes to like phone games and stuff, that's literally just that. It's literally just reskinning successful games to try to make a quick buck. Not what we're interested in here. So as a designer trying to grow, definitely don't do that. So you need to find what makes your game unique. You need to figure out that. But I've been designing a deck builder recently, and it's so nice to just lean on like you start with 10 symmetrical starting decks. You draw 5 cards a turn. When your deck runs out, you shuffle your discard into your deck. You draw these rules that are just so core to that genre of game. It's so nice to start from that point, not only from my design side of things, where I am able to, kind of uh, shortcut a little bit the early design process, get through kind of some of the not so fun stuff so I can actually start putting myself into it and actually let my identity show more in that way. But also, you just can't expect, realistically, you can't expect the audience to really care and want to learn a game from scratch. If I'm like, here's my deck builder, but it doesn't work like any deck builder you've ever played, no one's going to want to do that realistically um, in a normal setting because yeah, you rely on that foundation, and you're even going to confuse yourself when you start to try to interact with the rules and you're so used to one thing. So let the genre be the genre, get inspiration from it, understand it, and then find the ways that you make it unique. So kind of a different topic, but we've touched on it enough times that I think it's probably good to put out there, and that's something to deep dive more into at some point.
I like that example because as soon as I teach you the Imperium deck builder we've been trying to get to, I think you're going to have to maybe rethink that statement. It's so different. But I will say that Imperium has been one of the most like divisive games that I've introduced or just even read about online because of how much it breaks the mold of what people think are a deck builder. So it's just I'm looking forward to getting your opinion on it because it's a really interesting experience to think about how they designed this deck builder that's so different than the other ones I've
Yeah,
seen.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Good.
so one thing you touched on is kind of the you as a designer, and I think that's starting from software design up until now with board game design, trying to think of where you fit into this equation as the person creating this thing is sort of a slippery slope because as a designer, you probably have the most input from different points to leverage to make your ultimate product. But also, I don't know that listening to yourself is as important as listening to audience or users in this case. And so that's something I'm putting this out there because I think it's something I struggle with as a designer, which may be why I can't answer this question. Should you only design games you enjoy playing? Because there's so much you of my ego in design, thinking that I know best. But I think the lessons that I've learned from design is that the more you can take yourself out of it and sort of be a servant to the process of, testing and iteration, the more you can get to a true product that really matches what your audience is looking for. And it's not as fun to like go that direction as feel the opposite would be like this mastermind that understands all the pieces and all these ideas are coming from you. But really your audience just tells you so much, especially when you get to sit down and do playthroughs, that I feel like it is important that the designer of a game starts with that unique idea, is able to take all this and turn that into systems that work, turn that into an experience that people enjoy. But really listening to your audience and following their lead, I think is important to take you out of the system of the who's doing the design, and just let that flow more naturally. But at the same time, it's hard to get a lot of varied playtests for these games, and so I think software is very different where you have a lot of people using products and you can iterate on that. But in board games, like getting playtests is just, it's a lot of work. And so you end up being this more mastermind style designer that's iterating back and forth within the company rather than reaching out for feedback. And so it's going to be interesting to see how we can navigate that and sort of take ourselves out of the design and listen to our audience as much as possible, and maybe putting our ego or feelings about the game aside. And I think ultimately, the more we do that, probably the better product we'll end up with.
Yeah, and I think there's a few things there. I think that that's exactly what I brought up earlier. Like, if you are you do you ever get too close to something? Like, do you think you have too strong of a bias for the types of games you like playing the most? And are you better off finding some sort of middle ground? Maybe you're not designing that party game, but maybe you're also not designing the super intense cerebral TCG. Maybe you got to find that middle ground. The other thing I was thinking about is that, just to take that one step further, is like I feel like so far in this conversation, there's kind of been this baseline assumption that the types of games you play the most, that you enjoy the most, those are also going to be the games that you are best at designing. And I think that's probably not really the case a lot of the time. I think that they are two different skill sets. Um, and maybe your bias comes into play, maybe not. But regardless, um, y- you're probably doing yourself a disservice to assume that you're going to be best suited to design the type of game that you most like playing. I think you should be flexible early on as a designer to try your hand at a lot of different things, even if you're not doing all sides of the spectrum. At least try to like go here, go there, try a few different things, see if you really latch onto and you are able to kind of just, I don't know, see the matrix for a certain type of a game. And maybe that's not the game that you want. So I think being open to that as well, probably whatever it is, I'm guessing it's probably going to have elements of what you love. And you'll probably also be able to infuse and kind of hybridize. I mean, you look at what the whole music scene these days, it's all about genre blending, right? And so like maybe you can do a little bit of that once you find what you're really good at. And also to that end, maybe if you do challenge yourself with a few different types of things, you can actually make the deck builder worker placement, battler game, that Dune is, where it's like, well, this is spanning a bunch of different genres, and it really only existed because someone saw that vision and put it into application. So you don't want to pigeonhole yourself too much as well, but you also probably don't want to be so broad that you're not really honing in on mastering any one specific type of design.
I think as I chat more about this, I think I'm coming to a pretty clear realization that there's one side of me that is a game fan, a board game fan, and that side of me wants to put a board game out into the world that doesn't currently exist, that I would love to see out there. But the reality of being a designer probably doesn't match that headspace of being a fan. And I think, like, talking about this, you as the designer as before, really is starting to maybe sway my original statement backwards to, I think that it would be nice to go down that path, and maybe it's more alluring to go down the path of putting the game you want to see out, but maybe it's not the best for you as a designer, and maybe you're not even good at designing the kind of games, like you were saying, that you like playing. So I think that as I back up, just kind of thinking about where you want the company to be, where you see your portfolio being, and what kind of experiences you want your players to have. I think focusing on maybe the players and the experience that you're trying to provide might give me a similar satisfaction of playing games, but it's like twisted to we're playing the game of making games. We're not playing the game of playing the game we're making, right? And
Yeah.
so if I put it on that spectrum, I think I'm maybe reversing a little bit to being sort of like a servant designer where you're more about your audience rather than selfishly just wanting to put out a game that I want to see.
Yeah, and maybe that starts to formulate itself in a way that is almost beyond your control. You'll start to build a community, and you'll start to tap into the types of experiences, the types of games they like, and maybe that decision is ultimately made for you at some point. You know, you like this. These are the people that follow us. These are the kind of type of games they want to see, and so this is what I'm going to start to produce. I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier about like the passion, the motivation doesn't have to come from a place of this is the type of game I like. It might just come from a place of I'm actually doing something for my community. I'm doing something positive for the people who follow this company, and I'm ultimately appealing to a certain type of person. And if that's not me, that's okay. I think time would tell if that motivation would be as lasting as the motivation of this is the type of game I like. I can't say without having gone through it really, but I do think that you can probably get inspired through different avenues. It doesn't have to just be the thing I like.
Yeah.
Um,
I think, for me, just trying to really reset my expectation that ultimately I can let go of having to like the game that I produce because, for reasons stated earlier, it's just very unlikely that all that can line up. I think at the same time, it would be nice to put a game out into the world that you personally want to see in the world, but that doesn't have to also equal that you like playing it because, I just think that's increasingly unlikely that you spent all that time designing and iterating and that you still want to live in that world more. So yeah, I think that's going to be my biggest challenge to kind of move past that because that's sort of the mode I've been in for design and my ultimate litmus test on whether or not I was happy with the product I was producing.
yeah, I think that is probably a challenge. I think personally, I have kind of come to that in recent months. I think a part of it was I've been challenging myself to like design like a new game every month this year. So far, I've done it. I got to start working on my April game. Um, and in challenging myself, as well as the games I made in previous years, I've done enough at this point that, um, yeah, I enjoy a lot of it. No matter how simple the game or how complex the game, I'm really enjoying a lot of it. Um, so I don't personally feel like when we first started this, it's like, oh man, the dream would be to like make a TCG, but I don't necessarily feel that strongly about that anymore because it's like, um, really, the dream for me would be to be semi successful in this, and the journey is great regardless of that fact or whether that comes to fruition. But the ultimate dream would be like, yeah, we produced a product, we made some money off it, people are playing our games, it's on the shelves of some stores we know. Like that's what kind of success looks like for me in the long term, and or ultimate success, I should say. Again, I don't want to belittle the journey because ultimately we're both totally happy with whatever happens. But that would be the end goal, if we could make that happen, and whether
Mm-hmm.
that was a game that people would put side by side with Cards Against Humanity and say these are similar, or whether that is a super cerebral two-player intense battle of wits that very few people actually enjoy, but we do. Whatever, are they on the shelves? Are people buying it? Are people enjoying it? And are we ultimately kind of making money to put into the next endeavor? That's kind of what success looks like for me. So for me, I think my opinion isn't very changed from the start, but that's also because I copped out and made a very, very broad statement at the start, which is that you got to understand your goals, and the goals will kind of like lead you down a certain path. But you need to be honest with the goals. I think the big takeaway for me to kind of restate my views on this, I think the big takeaway for me was just thinking about a little bit more about your ego, your biases, your preferences, and how that's kind of it can be a um, uh, two-sided I can't think of the saying right now, but it could be good and bad. Um, it could help you because you have the passion and motivation and interest. It could also hurt you because you have too much invested. You get too personal about it. You can't see the vision. You're clouded because you already know what's best because this is the kind of game I like. Whether or not you consciously or subconsciously think that, I think it will play a role. And so I think there's almost like I don't know, almost coming around to this idea of like not the thing you dislike the most and also kind of not the thing you like the most, but rather like try to find somewhere in between and try to avoid the things that you don't like from those other games because if you fall into those same design tenets that you're probably going to have a hard time maintaining motivation, but maybe also get inspired by the things you do like in other games and ultimately create a product that is in line with your goals. And that's probably where I stand with this. Do you have any kind of final thoughts, or do you have like a restatement of your position?
That was almost as succinct as your original statement.
I think it was more words. At least before I was like trying to be mindful of my word count in a way that just now I was not. And honestly,
My
I don't
fault.
apologize for it. Uh,
So you had mentioned, we might produce a game that sits next to Cards Against Humanity. We might be able to go back on the reel and see me twitch a little bit. So maybe not that far for me, but I think ultimately I've sort of argued myself in a circle, which I came in almost 50-50 on whether or not, I thought that I'd want to be able to enjoy playing the game I designed. But I think what I've come around to is that the more we talk about things we've designed and the process of designing, that's the space it's important to enjoy as a designer because ultimately that's what we're doing. We're not players of the game, we're designers of the game. And so when I differentiate that, I think that the journey of design has been fun in all the genres. And I think really what I love in every aspect is problem solving. I think design in general is just intense problem solving, and whatever medium that problem takes, I think it's interesting to solve that and come up with a good product at the end. And so I think my final statement, my succinct statement would be that as a designer, I no longer think it's important that I enjoy playing the game. I think it's important that I enjoy designing the game.
okay. Um, do you think you could enjoy designing a wide array of games, or do you think right now, do you believe that there are only certain types of games that you would enjoy designing?
Yeah, I really think everything's fair game. And matter of fact, when we're talking about, servant to the audience, I think the more things we can try in these early stages, the more we give ourselves a chance to find like a spark that the audience really latches onto, and then we can let them inform, ultimately which of our products that we put more or which of our types of games we put more time into, because ultimately they'll let us know in testing or where they put their dollars on these first ones we like self-produce. And so I think throwing a wide net is kind of how I'm thinking about it, and your kind of monthly design challenge is a really good example of that. And just seeing what, you as a songwriter, you can't ever know when you're going to write a hit song. I think it's probably the same for game design. At some point all the stars will align and then the audience will like it and we'll have a career. That's the goal.
Yeah. I'll say also that you said you kind of like talked yourself around in a circle. I think we did a lot of like playing devil's advocate, trying to see different perspectives. I think ultimately it's a pretty nebulous concept we're kind of talking about, and I think at the end of the day it's more of an art than a science. I don't think you're going to find any hard and fast rules, um, and I think the art that I'm referring to is really about like you were saying, some of the early stages. Because if you do find success, you will, in a way, get pigeonholed because you're on a certain trajectory. And once you're on that path, it would be probably not advised to try to sway too far from it because you're on a track that's working. And when you're in a space that's so saturated and there's so many people trying to break through, don't break what isn't, sorry, don't fix what isn't broken. Um, so early on in this process, while you're still exploring yourself as a designer, Treat it as an art. Don't try to get too logical about it. I don't think. I think this kind of conversation just helps to kind of get the ideas flowing, maybe motivate us to step outside of our comfort zone a little bit. And again, I kind of go back to I don't think that it's a direct line between the games you enjoy and the games you're good at designing. I think there's probably some connection. It might be a bit of a Venn diagram, but I think that it could very easily work the other way, where you're kind of better off stepping a little bit away from your personal preferences, try to take the ego out of it a bit. Um,
Yeah.
so
At least at a minimum, I would say, like, don't ever let your personal preferences limit what you'll try from a design perspective, you know?
yeah, yeah, definitely. Wonderful. Well, any final thoughts on this topic? I think we kind of did it though.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I know more about my thought process than I did when we started, and that's why we do these things.
That's the goal. That's the goal. Well, hopefully you got value out of it too. Um, uh, like, subscribe, comment. I don't think we have any comments on any of our videos yet. I was looking at that yesterday, so this is me challenging someone. I want to hear someone's thoughts. So I would
I'm
love
just
to
going to
hear that.
say, someone except my mom, please comment.
Except your mom. You don't want to comment from your mom?
I mean, she can, but, that's the easy comment to get. She's already asked for the video to be sent to her after this, so.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Nice. Well, no, I mean, obviously, if it's not coming from a true place, then no worries. But I would love to hear people's opinions. You know, if there are any aspiring designers or current designers who watch this, if you disagree with us or if you learned something new, love to hear about it. Thanks everybody for listening. Until next time, I'm Easton. This is Chris. This is the RockFace Studios Game Design Podcast. Bye, guys.